am Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the wonderful Apple TV Plus series, The Changeling. We are joined today by actor and executive producer LaKeith Stanfield and actor Clark Backo. And LaKeith, starting with you, I mean, you've been involved in this project over the course of several years. I think it's about 7 years from when you first signed on to it. And I was interested in kind of coming on board and staying involved for that period of time as a producer and as an actor, how that really created a lot of depth in the relationship that you were able to build with your character Apollo, just constantly thinking about and envisioning the way that you wanted to play him in the series.
Yeah, it was a relationship that developed kind of over time and started to build. We come across a story and just knew it was something special, something that we could, that had a lot of potential. And so, it's just a process of going through all of the different necessary backdoor channels to bring something to life. It's quite a arduous process, but in the midst of that, you can actually build the story and add, details and layers to it, bringing it to the screen with Kelly Marcel. So it was quite the process, but it actually just afforded for us to continue to chisel away at what would be the final product. So it's a long process, but it was fun, and we knew that we had something worth exploring, so we just stuck it out. We really wanted to have Victor be on board and everyone on the team be on board in a way that could make it real. So yeah, it was worth it.
That's wonderful to hear. And Clark, for you, I was just interested in kind of how you found a lot of the starting point for yourself in building and developing your performance for Emma, because we see her in this kind of like idyllic, great romanticism stage of her relationship. And then after they have a child, going through what at first seems like a lot of postpartum symptoms, but then obviously there's something otherworldly to it that's also going on. And so I was interested in kind of what was the inroad for really the starting point as to who Emma was going to be with all of that going on for you.
Yeah, it is quite a journey that she goes on, that everyone goes on in this story. I think for me, the end point was really just understanding what moves her and why. And I think I found that in family and her childhood, which I can't remember what episode it is. Maybe episode 2 is when they flash back to her her whole background story with her mom and her sister and her dad. So I think just knowing that what she's most passionate for is to be the best mom that she can. I just tried to create as strong a link as possible between her and the baby, even though she only gets such a short time with the actual baby. Spoiler alert. I just had to make that very real and very strong. And then that he was my anchor for honestly everything else that happens.
And, LaKeith was mentioning before Victor Laval, the author of the book, being really heavily involved in the series as well. I know he was reading all the scripts, he narrates the series, and it sounds like he was on set pretty much every day as well. And so how did that really elevate the experience in, having such direct access to the author of the book as well? Because then you're really able to go so in depth with both the book and with the scripts at the same time for both of you.
I feel like one of the most incredible things about Victor is how much he had faith and trust in everybody. And I think he just actually offered so much space and freedom for us to explore in whichever way we wanted to, whichever direction we wanted to go in. And I'm not sure how many people know this, but the book is semi-autobiographical. Like he is Apollo and I am his wife, Emily. And so the fact that he was able to honestly give us such a major piece of him, I think it's in that freedom that was like the best collaboration, was that he didn't hold us back from wanting to explore things that he might not have even thought to explore. I don't know. That's what it was for me. He just was like a beautiful person that allowed us to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, Victor was he's just such a kind, generous man. Just, just in general, he's just so generous. And I think in a place like Hollywood that can be difficult to be, especially with precious material, can be scary. But he was, always in support of what we were doing, quite in awe at the process. So it was almost like watching a child at the spectacle of it all. And so it was kind of fun to relive what it felt like for me to have, being on set for the first time through him. And just he maintained this optimism throughout filming that just made us feel like, if the person that was responsible for writing this feels good about what's going on, we can feel confident that we're heading in the right direction. So yeah, it was just a treat having him there every day. And he showed up way more often than I would have expected, because that can be pretty mundane after a while, but he was still there.
That's wonderful. And LaKeith, in playing a character named Apollo, he has such a relationship with his own name. You kind of see him as a kid in the flashback scenes, like really wanting to live up to the prophecy of such a huge name. And there's the constant repetition of "I am the god Apollo," and the line that you have to kind of keep delivering at different moments. And I was just interested in kind of like how you saw his relationship with his name, and a name that has such prophecy attached to it, and in particular just the way that you wanted to go about delivering the line, which is kind of like his manifesto to himself that he repeats throughout the series.
It's an interesting question. I think yeah, names, they tend to mean more than we think, especially when you're growing up. Um, I think for Apollo, it kind of meant that it was a mantra, a word, a name that gave him power, that he felt connected to in hard moments that kind of pushed him through, reminded him that he was a manifester and that the power ultimately lied in his hands to change his destiny, change his route. So yeah, I found that it was a unique tool to use. I had never repeatedly said what my name was in any character. So at first it was a little uncomfortable, but I think over time you start to kind of get used to it. I think it happens within the character too. Like you hear him say it and you're like, this is weird, but over time you start to um, just join him on the journey. Apollo's a special character, so you often have to kind of assimilate to his way of doing things. So yeah, it was really fun, and I find that mantras in general have some sort of magical elements, different incantations and things you say to yourself in the morning, throughout the day, when hard times arise. Um, there seems to be magic in there, and I love the fact that fairy tales often have these motifs or mantras that appear throughout the story. So it was cool to actually play that out in this one.
I love that. And Clark, I wanted to talk a little bit about, for Emma, the idea of kind of like memory when it comes to her family, because she has this story that's a concrete memory to her of how she lost her parents in a house fire. And then she learns that actually what happened on the day was very different to what she thought, and that her and her sister were in the room when the fire started. The reason they went to the hospital was because they'd inhaled so much smoke themselves as well. And I thought that was so fascinating, because it's the idea of like, if you tell yourself a memory enough times, then you can kind of create it in a certain way. And so when she learns that truth, how did that recalibrate things for the character for you?
That's a good question. I do think that is a very interesting point about memories. And I do think as humans, we all kind of go through life believing what's easier to believe. I feel like if Emma really wanted to, she could have gotten to the truth of that memory on her own. I just don't think she was ready to see it before. But I think her sister tells her, and she receives it, both because it's a moment in time where she has to move from fantasy into reality, which is interesting because the further along we go into the show, the further into fantasy we step into. But truly, I think for Emma and every character in this, it really is about grasping truth and honesty and what is really in front of us and not the mirage that we see. So I think how that shifted things for her journey is kind of what I just said. Like, it's just time for her to accept what is and deal with what is instead of what was.
And then I also wanted to ask both of you about filming one scene in particular. I think it was in episode 3, and it's basically the moment where Emma's reached an extreme breaking point, and it's where she has Apollo chained up, with a lock around his neck in the apartment. Because I thought it was such phenomenal performances from both of you in a scene like that. And it's so striking because it's these two people who have had and held so much love for each other, and that hasn't necessarily disappeared, but they're both just so beyond their breaking point, and yet the love for their child is still kind of connecting them even in that instance. And I was just interested in how you both really approached it and finding the different calibrations and different emotions for a scene like that.
Yeah, I think it's really, I mean, I think for Apollo and his connection is really some uh the desperation that comes out of love and the needing to be loved, feel loved, I think is deep, and it manifests in Apollo because his child and Emma, they I think they both represent a sort of surrogate love for his family that he didn't have, in some way that he didn't realize that not growing up without that made him want to manifest that in his life, a family, people to be connected to. So that kind of agony is it's just multi-layered. And also just trying to get through to someone who you feel you love, but they have like sort of lost the path for some reason. Maybe it's a mental health thing, maybe it's some postpartum thing. It's difficult to understand what it might be, but there's this sense of desperation to get through to them, and that it felt like in those moments it was necessary that he was fighting for his life, but fighting for the life of his family, his child, and for his wife. And I think it's interesting to kind of like, have all of those emotions bubbling up, but not really understand why what's happening is happening. So there's layers of confusion in there too. Um, but I don't think we often see that kind of desperation from a father in the family. So I thought it was just kind of interesting to show, and the gruesomeness of it would, show where we would go in this story, and that, we were willing to show the harder things in order to maybe illustrate some deeper points. So yeah, it was a real challenging episode technically, but also quite fun. Um, the blood tasted good. It was it was it's kind of fun to be chained up to things, and as an actor try to figure out how you're gonna translate a performance in such a limited space, literally. So it was cool.
And for
Yeah,
you, Clark?
I feel like I tried to make it as fun for myself, at least as an actor, as much as possible. Obviously, it's not fun for Emma in the moment, but I tried to just think about how I could make this moment an internal moment of like true female empowerment. And there's so much different magic in this story that really makes you question like what's good and what's bad. But what I decided for myself, and I worked with our makeup artist Amanda on this a little bit, but I decided that the magic in this, it's almost as though Emma is using the dark magic from our villain, William Wheeler / kindergarten. And so it's like the smallest detail that no one would notice, but like William Wheeler has a butt chin. So we like created a little bit of a butt chin, and I gave myself bigger eyebrows to match his eyebrows because I wanted it to be like I'm using it, but I'm using it to do what I need to do. Like I'm not letting him possess me. I am actually using it and taking that dark magic on purpose to do the thing that I need to do, but that I need help doing. And yeah, apart from that, I don't know. Honestly, it was fun. Like it's so dark, but as an actor, I find those to be the most fun moments to step into. I got to smack him with the hammer. It's kind of fun. And they were supposed to have a dancer do all the like weird movements for me. They hired a dancer to do it, and they didn't tell me till like 10 minutes before we were shooting that I was going to do it. So I just ran to my trailer and was like, how am I going to do these glitchy things? Just had fun. I liked it.
Amazing. And LaKeith, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the more explosive moments for your character. There's, for example, the moment where we see him go into the library with the gun and he's just like, where is she? Where is she? Because he's looking for Emma. Because what struck me in the earlier episodes is seeing triggers in his life and things that would potentially be stress inducing, where he remains very calm. Like when Emma goes into labor on the subway, he's very calm about it. He's very tactical. When he's told about, oh, she has a naked photograph at a gallery in Norway, he doesn't react with any semblance of jealousy. And so there's a real stillness and calmness to him in a lot of places. So then when you had to find those extremities later on, what did you want to tap into in terms of where it was coming from for him?
It's a good question. I like this interview.
Thank you.
Nice. I think oftentimes when people are able to kind of keep a poker face in difficult situations, this is a skill that's been honed over time, a way of like processing and dealing with harder things that tends to be in the long run not really that healthy. In fact, the people that sometimes build these hard exteriors tend to unravel in very um, noticeable and explosive ways when those tools are not at their disposal anymore, or when they feel those tools are not at their disposal anymore. I feel like Apollo was just pushed to a point where, his need for um, um, for outside validation and for, people to view him as acceptable has kind of diminished. And so his emotions took over and took the forefront. Literally happened in the performance. Had to be conscientious of certain things playing Apollo, is a very specific way of approaching it. I think after a while, it just became more carnal, sort of visceral, the reactions, bodily reactions, your body responds to stress in interesting ways. So I was kind of just letting that happen in certain scenes. You're starting to see that it was just like, fluids running out of me, that is just like what was happening as a stress response. Um, and so, you start to see him unravel over time and sort of lose those safety nets that he had designed for himself. And I wanted to show that to show, just layers to Apollo, also this layers to his undying ambition, but also to show that, the human spirit it's like, layers of an onion can be peeled back, and what we'll go to and through to save our children and save our family. It's really, there's nothing like that kind of energy, that kind of tenacity that you'll find in a father and a mother when they're trying to protect their family. It sort of like does away with all social convention and goes back to just the bare essentials. So yeah, I definitely wanted to show that kind of breaking down over time. And Apollo seems like really put together, but trauma will often bring out the beast in us.
Absolutely. And Clark, I was also really struck by the fact that Emma ends up in such a space of isolation, and there's kind of these attempts to kind of feel like she's part of a community when she goes with Cal, and she's surrounded by all these other women, and there's other people who have gone through a similar version of events to what she has with her child, and all the uncertainties that come with that. And yet there's always this push and pull of her being very much between spaces, because at that point she doesn't fully feel like part of that community. She also can't just return home to her home life that she had before. So she's kind of often in this middle ground. And so what did you find to be the impact of that level of isolation as it increases for her throughout the series into such a space of solitude?
I guess I've never really considered her to be in a place of solitude. Of course, a lot has been ripped away from her. Her two main loves are not with her anymore, being Apollo and Brian. But I think because from the beginning I always had the anger of Brian, like the true Brian in her. She's never alone because he's always there. And I think the reason she has to keep herself away from people is because I feel like it's almost like there's like a beacon. There's like a couple times in the series, no clue what episode, but where she hears his voice, like a little baby laugh, or like just hears like a whisper in the wind. And I think that's the thing that is not only driving her, but keeping her together and keeping her company. And I think if she strays away from that too much, there's a chance she could lose that whisper. There's just a chance that she'll let that slip. And I think going to the island and seeing those women, even though there's comfort in knowing there's other women that have been through this, none of them, or I guess the other way to say it is they've all at some point given up, and Emma refuses to do that. And so they're also a reminder of what happens if you give up. You don't get your child back. And she knows that he's still alive and she's on a mission. So I think it's necessary. But I don't think she really thinks, or I never felt as her that I was alone or necessarily lonely. I think she misses Apollo and misses comforts, but there's just something so much bigger happening. And like Apollo said, and it's a line in the show as well, like the things we do for the ones we love, that's what she's doing. So I just think, there's bigger things at play.
I really love that answer. And, for both of you as well, you've both kind of in different answers touched upon a little bit of the physical elements that come with these performances as well. And I think you've both done such a great job at really tracking the emotional impact of what it means to be revisiting the muscle memory of trauma, to be experiencing grief, to be experiencing sadness, and, even just what is the impact beyond the emotion of the breakup of this relationship falling apart. And so for both of you, how did you kind of find the different physical trajectories of where you wanted your characters to go?
I think for me, it was quite literally like a unfurling for Apollo, even just in his posture at the start. So often a little bit more bent forward, curled in. Toward the end, it start to open up. I was thinking about the heart chakra and opening up. When you lead with your chest forward, it's a very vulnerable place, literally, but physically, your organs, everything that's important is in your torso and stuff inside your head. But opening up your torso to the world is a sign of confidence, but I think it might be indicating too that you're more trusting moving forward. Apollo wasn't trusting in the beginning, and later on began to trust. And so you can kind of see him opening up a bit. So I wanted to make sure, and then something to that physicality that might indicate that. Also, just kind of in general, became more physical as it became more pertinent to use more tools to achieve what he was trying to achieve. He had to get more physical. So he becomes more physical, running, jumping, falling from cliffs, climbing, whatever was necessary to try to find his wife and bring his family back together. So I kind of thought of it in some sense as kind of like being on the stage, where you use every bit of your body. So there were times where I tried to indicate that, Apollo felt comfortable with Emma in particular in using his body and, doing things that might seem silly, like falling from the table while they're having a conversation and gets new information and all things. And, just showing that, this is where he felt at home. When you're at home, you feel comfortable to jump on the floor, be naked, things like that. So, I just kind of wanted to allude to that. But yeah, you can see through incremental changes and it starts to sort of open up over time.
And how about for you?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a journey in the physical for Emma as well. It's kind of hard to pinpoint sometimes because we shot so out of order. And for Emma's journey, you kind of learn of it in pieces and not in order. But I think for me, I played around a lot with the sacral chakra, like more of the womb, which I think makes sense as a mother. But really, I actually worked with Tanisha Scott, who's a creative director, choreographer, movement coach, and we just played around with more of how Emma would walk once she's more of a witch. So that's more of the work that I did. But similarly to what LaKeith said, in the beginning, I gave her a lot more physical freedom. There's a lot more play. There's just more openness. And then as the story unfolds, there's kind of like a stillness that comes in her, because I think she needs to use all of her energy, kind of what I was saying before about listening to the whisper. Like she becomes more observant and still and quiet and patient and in tune with her senses. But there's something in that becomes smaller, I would say. And then at the very end, I think it's just more primal, just kind of let whatever come out. But yeah, apart from figuring out how I wanted to walk as Witch Emma, I just was a bit more instinctual about it.
That's so wonderful. And LaKeith as well with Apollo, there's so much of him essentially like replaying memories and just revisiting moments and carrying certain regrets for if I'd done more, if I'd done things differently, if I'd seen what she was seeing in the moment, then maybe I could have done more. And I was interested in just kind of like the challenges of trying to really capture that, because it's such an internal thing for him to be going through. And also how the gift of having scenes where you're literally having Apollo watch previous memories of the two of them together in the series at times also really helped with that.
Absolutely. I think, in any given performance, even in the performance of real life, which, we're always in, more is often indicated in what isn't said than what is. And internal struggles and things like that, whether or not we want to express them, tend to come through in our actions. And unchecked traumas, different things that we've gone through, tend to make themselves manifest in the way that we communicate with, treat others. And so I kind of wanted to just, just draw from that and Apollo's impatience in certain moments, unwillingness to see, inability to understand, and what that might mean. Just also play with the ideas of masculine and feminine, which I feel are quite present in the story, and just deal with how difficult it is sometimes for us to understand each other, because of programs, because of personal traumas and things like that that are inside of us. And so just being aware of that and trying to incorporate that into the story, um, and over time just sort of letting down the barriers that are put in place as much as we can. The fact that Apollo was willing to change, was willing to take in new information and try to move with that, I think was more important than the mistakes that he made. The fact that he was at some point willing to kind of face the storm. And that's something that I really like about Apollo. And I kind of wanted to make sure it was seen in moments where he could like sort of open up, and there was a childlike readiness to understand new things. And I kind of wanted to keep that in him, even though he was going through very hard things and there were things to process that he didn't really necessarily have a therapist or the right channels to unpack those things. He was willing to learn. And because he's willing to learn, he's willing to grow. And he was able to let the child in him grow, going back to young Apollo and, seeking what were the holes and how can I fill those things up now? And how can I unpack those things with my mother? How can I unpack those things within myself to try to push forward now? So it's important to try to indicate those things rather than necessarily outwardly show them, because I just think there's much more power in that for the audience as well, to try to find the things within themselves maybe that they haven't unpacked, or seen. And it's always better to show than tell, and that's what we always really wanted to do with this show as much as possible too, is kind of allude to things, rather than just give you the manuscript outright. So yeah, that's what it was for me.
That's really great. And Clark, I wanted to ask you about filming the scene where it's Emma having the red twine, like the bracelet tied on her, in that scene with the woman by the waterfall, because essentially in being told, by the time I finish tying these 3 knots, come up with 3 wishes, but be careful what you wish for, is Emma being asked to consider everything that she wants out of her life, and what is she happy with, what does she envision for her future. And it's a scene that we revisit so many different times throughout the series, so I was very curious as to what felt important for you to capture in that moment, especially knowing that we would keep kind of returning to it from different vantage points in different moments.
I don't know if I've thought about that before. I think it's in there already, but I think there's just like Emma has this brilliant, like, I don't even know what the word for it is, but she's truly fearless, in my opinion. And I think that's why at least that's why she captivated me, even on the page, when I read the book, when I read the scripts. Like, she just kind of launches herself into life. And I do think she's thoughtful, but in that moment, I don't think anyone could be thoughtful enough to not make some type of mistake in those wishes. Like, I don't think this is a story to go like, be careful. I don't actually think the theme is be careful what you wish for. Personally, I think no matter what she wished for, something would have happened that would lead them both on the same journey. Like, I think the point is, no matter what you wish for, we all have a journey to move through. And I just think with Emma, she's extremely courageous. And even though she might not always know exactly what she's doing, she is a light. Like, she guides herself. She has the intuition of like the primal woman, which I think is just so incredible. So I don't know. I think in filming that, I just wanted people to really see what I saw when I first read her, which is her strength and her uncanny ability to look something so dangerous straight in the eye and still say yes. And that witch, like, she's beautiful and mesmerizing. She's really a mirror of Emma, in my opinion. Like, that's Emma 2000 years from now, but it's dangerous, but she still just goes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go on this journey. I think that's really special.
Well, you've both given such beautiful and phenomenal performances in the series, so congratulations, and thank you so much for talking about the series today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.